Perfect. We are live, Johnathan, as we are breaking down a rough, heartbreaking Chicago Bears defeat against the Detroit Lions. Where J-Dub, like, we'll say this again when we actually start recording the podcast. Is it just me, or did it feel written in stone the moment that Santos shanked that PAT?
Oh, absolutely. You knew that Detroit was going to get a touchdown and go up by one there. Especially then when the Bears got the ball back up 6 and just like turtled their offense for a quick 3-and-out to punt it back and for field position so that Detroit had to go 90 yards. That was, you'd think they would realize by now that their defense can't stop anybody and, play to win the game. But that to me was the single most frustrating thing today, was
I
that
think
decision right there.
I think the worst part about it, J-Dub, is that the Bears. Okay, so this is where I feel for Luke Getsy, right? Because even me, who watches as much All 22 as he can get his hands on, right, is guilty of just reacting based on feel, right? Like, I'm mad that the Bears went 3-and-out. But you know what the truth is, Johnathan? They called the same zone read, inside zone run that had been killing the Lions all game up till then. The Lions just rallied around the edges of the defense and made sure the handoff went to Montgomery. And surprise, surprise, that's dramatically less efficient, isn't it? So it looks like I'll use the words that went through my head, Johnathan. Looks like two boring ass play calls to open up a drive captained by a defensive head coach, doesn't it? But in reality, it's pretty much the same thing that they'd been doing. Like, for me to say something like, "Oh, the Bears turtled up," would imply that they were doing anything other than just running the piss out of the ball up until then. And I think that's what makes this offense so funny, right? Like, as we get down to it, the worst part about this Bears team is that it is smoke and mirrors. It is Justin Fields versus everybody, because when they actually get in a situation where they have to pass, there is no answer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And we just see that time and time again in these late game situations we were talking about before going live, like Washington, Minnesota, Miami last week, this week, like every single time it comes down to a late game passing situation, all of a sudden, the O-line can't pass protect and Fields has guys on him right away and guys can't get open. When defenses know that you're throwing the ball, the lack of talent on the offense really gets exposed.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I don't want to keep you forever, especially since we've got another wonderful afternoon of football. I will tell you before we start recording that you've already drawn rave reviews on people recognizing that you're not Matt Nagy / Matt Eberflus with the mustache. I think it's funny every time. But if you're ready to record the show, I am. You good to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Bear With Me, a Chicago Bears podcast hosted by yours truly, Robert Schmitz, right here on the Windy City Gridiron podcasting channel. And we are coming at you live, me with the Bears blog's Johnathan Wood, right on the heels of yet another tight end-of-game loss, as we got another 4-touchdown, 310 combined yard performance from Justin Fields, and ultimately it amounted to another strange shootout loss. These, as Bears fans, are strange to watch, but help me out, Johnathan, because the Bears have now seemingly gone 0-5 in just 10 games in these late game scenarios. Is it wrong for me to be upset at the fact that they lost this game, or am I turning in my nerd card and should just take the tank loss and walk away with it?
Yeah, I think there's real arguments to be made on both sides there. I mean, it certainly does help their draft position, but when I'm watching the game, I'm not rooting for draft position. I'm rooting for a nice Bears win. Just as a fan, I can't help that. And it's certainly frustrating to see that not happening time and time again. But what I do like, maybe not as much today, but in a lot of those late game situations, it feels like Fields has made the plays he needed to make, and it's been other guys letting him down. I think of the fumble against Minnesota, Mooney not getting the ball in the end zone against Washington, Equanimous St. Brown dropping it last week on 4th and 10. This week, I guess if anything, it was really the kind of O-line letting them down, because on that last drive, Fields was just getting crushed. And I'd have to see the all 22, but he was very slow to throw the ball, which makes me think there was probably nobody open as well. So again, it's not so much that like Fields is screwing up in those situations. It's just, again, the talent around him is not what it needs to be, and that's getting exposed.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I think makes this such a complicated scenario to talk about, right? Like, am I really upset that the Bears gave up 31 points against the Lions? The Lions were really good offense to lead off the season. This isn't actually all that surprising from them. And the Bears defense, verifiably not good, especially based on what we've seen throughout the season so far. But when you've got all-star UDFA Jack Sanborn starting to pop up as one of the better players on the defense, and Justin Jones ending up on his butt on touchdown runs right at the end of the game, you got a bit of a problem as far as talent goes. But the Bears seemingly are starting to show the ugly truth that is, whenever they are put in positions where they have to pass, the opposing defense has a major, major advantage. And the only reason that they haven't ended up there before, Johnathan, is because let's go back to the Cowboys game as a silly example. They have just patently refused to admit that they have to pass. I mean, against the Cowboys, down 3 scores, they continue to run the ball like ever. And like you're saying, I mean, we have mostly seen this season Fields do his part. In this game, certainly there's nothing more visually frustrating than watching Fields break not 1, not 2, but 3 tackles on a 4th down and still not manage to throw the ball. But if it was anybody else, we'd automatically blame the receivers. Instead, it's a quarterback with a penchant for holding onto the ball too long. So we just don't know. Either way, I know if there's any negative takeaway from this game, I guess it's that I am a little worried that that whole losing culture thing starts to creep into this locker room. I'm well aware they have $140 million in cap space, and they will likely add some real badass talent on both sides of the line, probably at the receiver room somewhere, as well as plenty of other positions. But Johnathan, you tell me, am I justified in worrying about a team that is uniquely finding ways to lose? I mean, whether it's a blocked punt, whether it's a missed extra point, and then allowing a game-tying score immediately afterwards, whether it's 2 dropped punts earlier this season or a wide receiver strip after failing to go out of bounds, I am not going to criticize Eberflus after 10 games of a season where they're already massively overperforming based on their talent. But I mean, gracious alive, this is visually frustrating. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's absolutely frustrating in the moment. I've been kind of impressed by their ability to bounce back, especially in the last few weeks when games start to turn against them. I think of that today. There was that ridiculous hands to the face call against Jalen Johnson that then turned into a touchdown off of what should have been basically a game-sealing interception by Sanborn. And then Fields had the pick 6 right after that. And all of a sudden it went from 24-10, Chicago has the ball about to ice the game, to, oh crap, it's 24-24. And they bounced right back and scored to take back control of the game, at least temporarily. Or like against New England a couple weeks ago, they had that great start, and then all of a sudden Bailey Zappi came in and it was like a tie game, and that was all erased.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, I've seen this before. The Bears are just about to get blitzed, and they just took the game back over. And so I think that has to matter some too, as much as losing at the end in some of these games is frustrating. We've seen them refuse to let like the tide turning in a game, like turn them into defeatists. And I really like seeing that attitude.
I mean, that's a good point, Johnathan, because the argument could be that this is almost starting to look like a monkey's paw season, right? That some Bears fan wished on the monkey paw that Justin Fields would be good no matter what. And so we're getting a Justin Fields that's looking unequivocally good. I mean, whether it's with his legs or with his arm, and certainly I actually thought he had a relatively inaccurate day today, but all the same, he persevered for 4 scores, 310 yards, and pretty much the only reason the offense seemed to be moving the ball. It's just that, I mean, Johnathan, they keep taking games where they should be blown out by halftime, and they're still in it near the end of the game, and then they lose it. It's like the result that we expected to happen happens. It just happens in a way we didn't expect it, which maybe there's some serious positive to be taking there, that against teams like the Miami Dolphins, like a very high-powered Detroit Lions, the Bears are without a doubt keeping pace. It's just a bummer that they lost to a team that seemingly everybody else is beating, but I mean, at the same time, this is the year for it, right? I do think that there are positives to be taken on both sides of the ball. I don't think Kyler Gordon played super well today, nor did Jaquan Brisker, but Jack Sanborn is starting to look like every bit the instinctive linebacker that any massive, super hopeful fan was looking for him to be. And if anything, I mean, let me put my nerd hat back on, Johnathan. It's got to be nice to see a cheap, undrafted free agent showing these kinds of instincts and potentially offering you a solution that, if I did the math right, would be 50 times cheaper than somebody like Roquan Smith, right? Because that's more money you can invest in premium positions.
Yeah, I said it instantly when Roquan was traded. They decided they're not going to pay him, then getting the picks makes a lot of sense and is a win. But I thought also having then a half season to play Sanborn and evaluate him was also a small win, just because you can see if he is anything, and that can influence what you need to do next offseason when you have all these resources to work with. And if he keeps playing like he did today, I don't know that he's athletic enough to be a star. There's a reason he was undrafted, but instincts matter so much at linebacker, like you just said. And if he can be instinctive enough to at least be a quality player, even if that's just as like a quality role player on defense, that still has real value for 3 years, 2 more years after this year for dirt cheap.
Absolutely. I mean, not only does he seemingly have a knack for being in the right place at the right time, which is, key in a 3 or 4-3 linebacker spot, but he's hitting in the run game. You can see him getting off blocks better than top 10 pick Roquan Smith could have. Not that I want to invoke a comparison immediately. He still found a way to manage pass rush pressure and a sack himself. And Jada, we got to segue into the officials a little bit. I hate talking about officials. Every time it comes up on the post game conversation, I can't not bring it up. It would be ridiculous for me to not bring it up, but the Jalen Johnson hands the face call, the late hit call on Kyler Gordon knocking the ball out of bounds, and Jared Goff just tripping, the weird no call DPI where it seemed as if I can never remember his name. The Detroit linebacker seemed to hold Cole Kmet's left arm. There were a lot of plays. The ticky-tack holding call on Braxton Jones early on. Look, I don't want to be a homer. I am always a staunch proponent of you've got to be good enough to beat the refs, even when the field feels tilted. But for crying out loud, what is going on with officiating in these last two Bears games? It is as if Ryan Poles made the call himself to Commissioner Goodell and said, "Can you just slant the field?" Because it started to become such I don't know. Am I crazy for complaining about some of these?
No, I mean, I thought it was really bad in the second half, especially today. I listened to most of the first half in the radio on the car on the way home from church, so I can't really comment intelligently about some of those calls. But yeah, all the ones you mentioned were pretty rough. Um, I've seen some people online like, oh, the game must be fixed, that the refs are like throwing the game intentionally, and I'd be pretty shocked if something like that came to be. But I think it's just a lot of bad luck in a short period of time.
Sure
Yeah.
seems like it. I mean, it's wild watching these things because, again, all I want is a cleanly called game. If it's a penalty, call it. If it's not a penalty, don't call it. I could care less if the penalties or if the Bears commit 15 calls a game, deserve all of them, and all of them get called. It will never feel like a slant in that case. But it does seem like so far on the week to week, we're seeing a lot of calls that in other games often don't get called. In the Bears game, like, it feels as if one side's getting them, one side's not. I know I'm a fan. At the end of the day, I'm always going to feel like the refs are pitted against the Bears. But the Jalen Johnson hands to the face in particular was flat out awful. And Jack Sanborn, to me, seemed to deserve the first interception of his career. And when you see a call like that, and it goes from taking 7 points off the board to a play that was just shy, or like it was very, very quick on the heels of the Lions tying the game and ultimately winning it, it feels like we got to figure something out from an NFL wide perspective, because I can't help but think that, Johnathan, whether it's a sky judge, whether it's like reviewable calls, whether it's more challenges, something's got to be there so that somebody can take a second look at something like this. Because I understand why when you see Johnson's hands flash forward and the player immediately falls over and doesn't get up, that it looks like something happened. But it's too big of an impact on an NFL football game to let that kind of thing go unchecked. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this goes way beyond the Bears games. I watch a lot of other football games too, and it feels like the refs are just part of the story far more often than they should be. And I think that's just a real problem that is hurting the product of the NFL as a whole. And they've got to figure out some way, whether that's better training to get better officials or add an extra official for instant review or something. But you just got to find a way to have them impacting the game less, because it's the players who should be deciding the outcome of the game.
Can't help but agree. And thankfully, Jonathan, we've got a lot of positives to talk about from the Bears players because not only did we have, I mean, we did actually have some solid defense, I thought, especially from Jack Sanborn, which again, it's not that it was anything flashy. It's that from a down to down basis, he and the rest of the defense were starting to just make Jared Goff earn it. And we'll get to the negatives because I just thought of another one talking about the pass rush. But Justin Fields, I mean, how fun is it to watch number one play football? What are you enjoying watching?
All of it. I mean, I've been wanting this. I've been wanting a quarterback in Chicago my whole life. I was born in 1988, so I mean, I didn't even see like Jim McMahon. Cutler is far and away the best Bears quarterback of my lifetime, and he was. Well, I know there's lots of opinions about Cutler, but he was very volatile and averaged out to probably around average at best. It's just so fun. He just looks like the best player on the field every time he's on the field. And I've been so incredibly jealous for the last several years watching like Bills fans, Chargers fans. I'm just seeing them with their young quarterback. And just, I wake up like on Sunday mornings, like I get to watch Justin Fields play today. This is awesome. I haven't had that before with the Bears quarterback.
It's must see television, Jonathan. I mean, everybody's going to come away because it happened later, and we obviously work chronologically, right? And remember Justin Fields racing away for a 50-plus yard rushing touchdown where he embarrassed the middle field safety and then just had the speed to break loose. But let's talk about a play that I think is just so unconscionable that the only other player that could have possibly made it might be Kyler Murray in Arizona. What did you think at that end of half run? Did you see it? Because I know you said you were
Yes.
listening to it on the
Yep. I
radio.
got home at the 2-minute warning.
I mean, what did you think turning the game on and catching that?
That reminded me a lot of his touchdown run against San Francisco last year, where again, it looked like he was dead to rights. I was like screaming at the TV, like, throw the ball, get rid of the ball, get rid of the ball. No, 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 no. Yes. It was just one of those plays, just made something out of nothing. And it was incredible.
Absolutely. And I mean, the funniest part is, like you're saying, I have seen that play a bazillion times from all kinds of quarterbacks, not the run. Let's be clear. Like Mooney coming inside, snagging back out, and getting blanketed, right? We're just accustomed to seeing a low throw, Mooney going down for it, the coverage guy coming over the top, the coverage guy batting the ball on the ground, and then a whole bunch of people on Twitter going, Mooney sucks. Why do we like this guy? Like, don't extend him. And we've lived this before, haven't we? A billion times. Like a normal NFL quarterback throws the ball. So Fields holding it and allowing 3 defenders to come in on him like they did. It's just crazy because watching him as a fan, there are so many things that he does that if it didn't work, it would just be boneheaded, right? If he hadn't shown us the ability that he's shown us, it's just a silly decision. Then he breaks a tackle, runs away from 2 more guys, and punches his way into the end zone, quite literally and very physically. And you're just sitting there in awe. The Chicago Bears have potentially one of the most physically gifted quarterbacks in the NFL. Like I said, one of the, because the potentially is that they might have the most physically gifted quarterback in the NFL right now. It is just crazy watching a guy come a baby's breath away from setting his own record again. Had he toted the ball anymore on that last drive. I mean, watching Fields right now feels like living in a dream state. Because it's like watching, honestly, Jonathan, it's like watching a really good Madden player and you mutter to yourself as you watch him, you say that would never work in a real game. And here he is playing the same dual threat 4 touchdown game. And when you do stuff like that, you can forgive the occasional silly pick six and just call it a learning moment because we're seeing the rest of it come together, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a throw you just can't make, but that's a mistake that a young player makes. And especially for somebody who's a playmaker like Fields is, learning when to just admit that, okay, this play is dead. I need to just turf the ball or throw it into the stands or whatever. Just try to make what I can with my legs. Just you cannot throw that pass, and
No.
that's for somebody who's used to being the best and most gifted player on the field. It's really hard to ever concede defeat on a play. But I have seen him doing that, especially the last 2 weeks more, where he's trying to scramble and okay, it's just not there. They've got this covered. I'm just going to throw it away instead
Right.
of trying to just desperately make something happen and then fumbling or something like that.
And I
So
mean,
I like seeing that growth.
like you're saying, it's so complicated because had he thrown that ball, so to use an example, like you're saying, I'm not about to cape for that throw. That throw was awful, right? Categorically awful. Was it wide open? No. The screen was covered the entire way. As soon as he got to the top of his drop, the screen wasn't there. There's not a lot of great places to go with the ball if a screen's covered up, Johnathan. Because, like you've seen, I mean, especially if the defender's standing in front, even the throw to the guy's knees isn't safe. So there's, I mean, for all we know, it was an extremely weak throwaway. I doubt it. We've just got to assume he was trying to float the ball to Kmet, but it's a bad decision. But at the same time, Fields making what other people would consider bad decisions and turning them into great plays has been pretty much the entire reason the Bears are starting to hang 30 on just about everybody they face. So I get that the feedback loop's a little weird, right? I would rather see that in a 4 touchdown game than that in a three interception game where we're hanging on to like 1 13-yard run as the special play of the game. I've been there. I really don't want to go back. Like you're saying, at least we can look at it as a learning moment. And I can't help but feel like watching Fields run, tear teams up on the ground, stretch the defense to its absolute limit is really exciting. The only thing I want to see the Bears grow within is their passing game. Their standalone passing game right now feels too basic. I mean, I get it. Late game scenarios, you want to see that talent rise to the top, but whether it's nobody getting open or what I'm seeing on all 22, Johnathan, the concepts that they're calling against man coverage are pretty meek. It's not that like there's all sorts of routes out there that are true man beaters and they're calling none of them, but things like snag routes, like true snags that is like a slant and then you spin it back and you go to an out route. An out route, honestly, against cover 3, the Bears just aren't calling any of those. I mean, the Bears aren't calling option routes or any of the other standard things you would deploy against man coverage. And it does make me wonder, okay, is that the receivers? Is that lack of faith in the offensive line? Fields, who seems to be playing with the playbook very, very well, at least based on what we're seeing called in front of us, is he struggling to process everything he sees on the football field? I don't know. When you watch these games, do you have a guess? Like, what do you think is going on? Is it just talent? And if it is talent, how do the Bears fix it?
I mean, I think it mostly is talent, honestly, and that's not a surprise based on what we thought going into the season. And I think you fix that by adding more talent, which they've already started to do with Claypool. And I know he was real quiet today, but the guy's been in Chicago for like 11 or 12 days. And this is a playbook that is fairly large and not super simple to learn. And so I'm sure it'll take some time for him to really get comfortable with everything they want him to do. Because I don't even know how much he was on the field, like on that last drive, when you might be having to run hurry up situations and things like that. They might not be able to trust him. I know he had the one like back shoulder target, but beyond that, like in the hurry up is when you need guys who really know what they're doing in those late game situations. And that's when, 2 of your 3 wide receivers are Dante Pettis and Equanimous St. Brown. And yeah, surprise, surprise, the passing game isn't working.
Right. I know I'm frustrated because, like anybody else, I mean, NFL offenses have been passing so frequently that even as defenses shifted too high and running the ball is ultimately getting more and more open by the week, and the Bears are obviously like being productive with the touches that they're given, it still kind of sucks talking about these big games and having to bring up, guys, we got to combine the yardage so that I have to avoid, or so that I can avoid talking about a 150-yard performance. I mean, right now, when Fields cracks 200 yards, it is a pretty special game for him. But I really do find myself wondering, because every time I watch all 22, it's not like there are guys running wide open, Johnathan. I mean, the scheme and Fields seem to be, I wouldn't say struggling, right? But they seem to be in tandem. It's all a process. And for a second-year quarterback, that's not unusual, but it definitely would have felt better had he ran his way to a win instead of what ultimately happens. It always sucks when you end the game on a fourth down failure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And the volume stats certainly aren't there with Fields passing it. I've got them pulled up right here. Over the last 7 games, he's got about 1,200 passing yards. So yeah, that's 200 per game would be like 1,400. So he's at maybe 175 or so a game,
Right.
which is not great. But he's also at 7.4 yards per attempt, which is around or slightly above the NFL average. So it's just they're just not throwing a lot, but they're throwing
Right.
okay when they do, except for like you pointed out in those late game situations, it's a bit more of a struggle because teams know they're going to throw. They're just
Absolutely. And
they're just running it so much.
running it so much, they're running it relatively well. I know that the Fields' stats when he runs the ball are just unconscionable. Like how is he doing from a statistical perspective every time he gets the ball?
Yep, I've got that right here too. So looking at the last 7 games, he's at 654 yards, so just under 100 yards per game, and 8.5 yards per carry, which is like laughable. A
That's
running back
bananas.
is doing really well if you hit 5 yards per carry. Like average is around like 4.5 or so.
Right. And I mean, okay, so while we're on the topic, I have no idea if you've got anything pulled up for him, but I feel like we can't go the first half of this podcast without bringing up the guy who might be the hottest overall player in football based on his production before 3 weeks ago to now. Cole Kmet is on an absolute tear. Like, whether it's stats or when you watch him, do you feel like 85 looks any different right now? Or do you think it's just a matter of he's starting to find that tight end quarterback chemistry and they're just starting to make plays together?
Yeah, I don't know the exact stats now, but I tweeted it at some point in the second half, like right after that big 50-yard touchdown. Over the last 3 games, he had like 13 or 14 targets, like 12 catches, and about 120 yards and 5 touchdowns. Before
Wow.
that 50-yard touchdown, it was like 11 catches for like 70 yards. So
Right.
it's a lot of short stuff. They've been doing a lot of like tight end screens to him that have been pretty effective. A lot of like goal line stuff where it's maybe like an 8 or 10 yard pass. I think it's, to my eye, although you're certainly more of a film guy than me, it has felt a lot like they've been scheming him open better. Like they've figured out how to use him better within the offense, especially as Fields running the ball has become so much a threat, and like his gravity of pulling defenders to him, and then they can like leak Kmet open a little more easily. That's how that big touchdown happened today.
Right.
And just a big enough, athletic enough, fast enough guy to take advantage of some of that when somebody takes 3 or 4 steps out of the way to try to account for the run. And then all of a sudden, oh, Kmet's wide open behind him.
That seems like exactly what I'm seeing. I mean, Kmet was used so heavily as a blocker early on in the season that right now he becomes a player that either you can't afford to pay attention to because you've got to keep extra eyes on JF1, or he becomes a player that you commit too many resources to covering and then, Fields just runs away from you for another easy 28-yard gain. I mean, on that Kmet touchdown in particular, I'll give Kmet some credit to adjusting for a ball that I don't think he was running the route for. It's always impossible, Johnathan, to know who's wrong when you're dealing with passes almost 35, 40 yards downfield. But it looked like Kmet was waiting for the ball to hit him further closer to the sidelines and then realized it was going to come back over his left shoulder, adjusted to it, made the catch, and then walked into the end zone, which thank goodness he did, or I think all of Twitter would have just absolutely lit him up for. But on these rollouts, Justin Fields, especially when he's rolling left, generally has a high, a mid, and a low read. I mean, you've seen it a billion times because, Johnathan, we used to talk about this with Mitch Trubisky, right? You've got the throw into the flat. You've usually got an alert post, or I guess it's a corner further down the field, and then you've got somebody a little bit delayed running an over. On this play, the Bears they used that to send Kmet the other direction. They sent him to the entire other half of the field because you've got to keep people honest. And the Lions obviously had the safety just didn't see it coming. And I mean, when you get suckered in the NFL, you get embarrassed. And
Mm-hmm.
that play was pretty embarrassing. It was fun to see, honestly, because I've been hoping that the Bears showed up showed up within that kind of thing, that they or that they started to key off of their own tendencies. But it's nice to see Fields hit a deep strike downfield. It's nice to see Fields all over the highlight reel. I mean, that's three plays that are going to be massive highlights this week, because I can't remember the fourth touchdown off the top of my head. And you know what? At some point, Johnathan, I know that there are so many people, and I don't blame them, that want to see their franchise quarterback automatically look like Patrick Mahomes. Who doesn't, right? But I feel like you got to see the flashes before you start to see the entire picture really crystallize. Right now, you tell me what you think. I feel like Fields looks like a very, very talented, but also very young quarterback that's still putting things together. It feels like he's improving on little things every week. There was a point early in the season where we made jokes about how often he took sacks. Now he's taking sacks at a much more regular rate. And I'd even go so far as to say, because I don't have stats right in front of me, that he's converting quality scrambles off of probably what 2-to-1 ratio. You get a quality scramble rather than a sack, and so you'll take the good with the bad. But it feels as if he's improving, not all the way there. And sure, I'd love to see high talent too. We probably need to talk about Claypool a little bit, but it does feel like Fields is showing you all of the realistic things that you could expect, and frankly, more on top of that.
Yeah, I was looking at this a little this past week actually, and he reminds me a lot of like rookie Lamar Jackson, who had kind of the same thing. Like he made a ton of plays for Baltimore. He only started like the second half of their season or so.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it was more as a runner than a passer. Like he did some stuff as a passer, but not great volume, only about like 20 passes a game, similar to Fields, but just a ton of incredible run plays. And then, had an off season to put in the work, get comfortable in the offense and with his receivers in that offense a little bit more. And the next year was his MVP year. Not that I'm saying Fields is winning MVP next year, but I think that's when you can hope to really see the leap as a passer. Once he gets, we've seen him getting more comfortable in the offense, but hopefully with better talent, better pass protection, and more familiarity in the offense next year is when we should start to see that volume as a passer
Certainly hope so.
pop a little bit more.
And I mean, I do think that there's something to be said, Johnathan, for chemistry. Because as much as chemistry seems like it doesn't really matter when you've got somebody like Nick Foles who steps in and immediately just starts chucking darts behind the line of scrimmage, when you're passing deeper downfield, as we know Justin Fields likes to, you need to have your receiver understand where you like to put the football. And sure, I mean, Justin Fields had a relatively inaccurate day today. He missed Byron Pringle on that throw from the pocket. I thought on the Chase Claypool back shoulder attempt that the ball wasn't anywhere near where it's supposed to be. And frankly, it was such a poor ball that Okudah couldn't make a play on it. And for that, we are just thankful. But all the same, we also took some bad that with some serious good, incredible playmaking ability. More than one throw, Johnathan, where for the first time in what I think is the last 3 weeks, Fields didn't just tuck the ball when he started to step up in the pocket. I'm sure you saw, even in just the second half and a little bit of that first half, enough opportunities where Fields stepped up, tucked the ball, reminded himself, oh, shoot, yeah, I should be looking to pass, huh? Pulled the ball back out and found somebody downfield. Like you're saying, I can't help but see exactly what you're saying, where I would compare him to a very good rookie, right? But the rookie that we're comparing to ended up being a stud in the NFL. So I feel like we're seeing the right indicators, even if he's a little longer in the tooth from a development perspective. And if I can be honest, I know it sounds ridiculous, but the guy graduated from Ohio State. The idea that it would take a little bit longer for him to adjust to a development curve of understanding that not everything that you want within every play is going to be open just because your play caller called it. I actually think that that's something that big program guys like an Ohio State quarterback would have to take time to adjust to. Don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I always wonder about that for guys coming from those like blue blood programs, especially as like Ohio State is just, when he was there, was so head and shoulders above everybody else in the Big Ten that it was pretty much just the college football playoffs every year when the talent level was anything close to even. Otherwise, his offensive line was vastly superior to the defensive line, and his wide receivers were vastly superior to anybody they went up against. And so having to go from that to the opposite end of the extreme for his first 2 years in Chicago, I'm sure was a bit of a shock.
jarring to say the least. But at the very least, it certainly seems like he's seeing it. I know that there are a lot of people out there that might say it doesn't look like Fields is reading the defense, but I think it actually takes a lot more skill reading the defense to understand when you can and when you can't scramble. Multiple times in this game, the Lions actually did take the scramble away, and that was when Fields launched a ball downfield with at least two. I think it could have been three, but my memory is a little fuzzy. Passes that were 10-plus-yard passes. Sure, they weren't perfectly in his receiver's hands, but they were catchable. The receivers came down with them, and the Bears converted first downs off of them. Fields is seeing the field relatively well. It does, to me at least, Johnathan, feel like every time we hit these late game scenarios, I am very quickly reminded that the Bears' offensive line might be a bigger factor in why we're not getting more 7-step drop back passes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with no Tevin Jenkins today. I think with Jenkins in there, their guards are pretty solid with him and Whitehair, but tackles are both probably like borderline starters, high quality backups. Center, same with Mustafa or Patrick, honestly. And so it's just an offensive line that can get by in pass blocking at least. Their run blocking's been, I think, pretty good, but the pass blocking definitely, I think they're going to have 2 or 3 new starters there next year.
I definitely agree. Now, there's plenty more that we can talk about, but the sponsors are killing me and need to get their word in. So, Johnathan, we're going to step aside for a little bit. We'll come back. We'll talk about a couple more overarching points and we'll finish out with final thoughts. Sound good?
Sounds great. Thanks.
Perfect. And we are back with Bear With Me. I'm Robert Schmitz here with Johnathan Wood. And Johnathan, let's play a game that I thought of in the moment, right? Where I'm just going to ask you about a couple topics throughout this game. You tell me if you're worried right now. You tell me if you're worried about them in the future. And if you're not, or whether it is or isn't, what's the solution to fixing them? For instance, the Bears' complete and total lack of pass rush from their front four. Are you worried about it now? And are you worried about it in the future? How do you think things change?
Not really worried about it now just because it's going to be bad. They're going to have 3 new starters on the defensive line next year, if not 4. The rest of this year is for finding out what you have with the guys who are there. Like, can one of Robinson or Gibson be a starter, or are they like your top 2 backups at defensive line? Are you okay with Jones continuing to start at 3T, or do you want to upgrade him and have him be like your top interior backup? I think those are the types of questions to answer, but I think defensive line is probably going to get the most attention out of any group on the roster this offseason.
I can't help but agree. I mean, the Bears have $140 million and they got to spend it somewhere, right? And if Ryan Poles has shown us that he's not going to spend it on inside linebacker, how many positions can he really hand the money out to? Like, sure, I'm sure that Jalen Johnson, Darnell Mooney, dare I say, even Chase Claypool, may be very well eligible for extensions, but it doesn't change the now money. And defensive line seems like much too obvious a choice. Johnathan, did you know that the Bears might be the overall cheapest roster in the NFL right now? They are last in offensive spending and second to last in defensive spending. And I personally think the Bears are getting what they pay for. If anything, they're getting more than they are paying for. And so I'm also not worried about the defensive line. It's embarrassing to watch, and I'm never going to change the fact, or like I'm never going to stop saying that. Sure, as a fan, watching Jared Goff and Tua Tagovailoa stand forever in the pocket before finding somebody stinks. But I do think that things change drastically next year, and that's something I'm very excited about. Chase Claypool, 1 catch for 8 yards, if I'm seeing things correctly. Worried? Not worried.
Not worried. I think it's just really too early to say anything with him at this point. Again, he's been here for 12 days. They have a package of plays for him that so far seems pretty limited to like sweeps and screens or go routes. Basically, he's replacing Velus Jones Jr. Until he can learn the playbook better. If he's still doing this a month from now, then yeah, I'll be a little worried because hopefully he's enough in the playbook by then that he can play mostly a full-time role. But for now, I'm not really expecting a lot from him.
I agree, though I will be honest that I'm just, you hope that you get a bigger splash. If you'd switched last week and this week, it makes more sense, right? But their willingness to get him involved so quickly last week makes a week like this week a little strange, but hey, it happens. The All-22, I think, will tell a different story about Claypool. I don't even know how often he was back on the field, right? But it does feel as if this playbook, for as remedial, dare I say, as their passing concepts look sometimes, Johnathan, everybody keeps talking about how this playbook's hard to learn. So I have no idea what the truth is, but I'm not worried just yet. Always a bummer to spend a second round pick on a guy that isn't an instant addition, but not a lot of guys are instant additions, right? It takes time for people to work their way into the offense. All right. So we already talked about the defensive line. We already talked about the receivers. Jaquan Brisker got hurt. Kyler Gordon had another game where he did not seem especially fantastic. Worried or not worried about the young defensive backs?
Not worried, honestly. I mean, I kind of expected going into the year both would have plenty of rookie struggles because the passing game gets a lot better from college to the NFL. And so I expected there to be a learning curve there. I'm hoping that they can both be quality starters in 2023. And if we're, a month into that season and they're still looking somewhat like this, then I will be very worried.
Yep. I can't help but think the same way. I mean, there's a lot of this defensive back stuff that I can't help but think, Johnathan, that as much as defensive back talent can be evaluated within like the scope of the defense right now, every single defensive back in history looks better when their front four is any better than the front four that they've got right now. And so I am curious to see what happens when, say, somebody like Kyler Gordon isn't playing two jobs at once, where he's not doing as much run support and can focus a little bit more on pass protection purely. But we'll have to get there when we get there. Call me a homer and an optimist, but Brisker in particular has shown some serious flashes. Gordon has some work to do, but that's not unusual, not only for nickel corners, but also for athletic projects like Kyler Gordon was. But I feel like you got to see them within a defense that's better than the defense that they have now. Because right now, the front four talent is so bad that the fact they get any run stops at all feels honestly surprising sometimes. And then the final worried, not worried that I have, Matt Eberflus. Games, like all these close games that they continue to lose. We talked about it earlier. Are you worried? Are you not worried about the coach's ability to will his team to win at the end of games?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'm going to say maybe a little bit of both here. If anything, I think they're overachieving right now based on how bad their roster should be on paper. And so there's got to be some credit to coaching for that, although basically Justin Fields is dragging the offense to score points and keep them in games. So a lot of credit goes to him. But I just hate seeing, except for the second half of Minnesota, he's just been too conservative, I feel like. And that's really frustrating to see just because I feel like, especially now, like you're 3-7, like what do you have to lose? Go for it. Start to feel out some of these game situations and don't play it safe. Play to win and see what you can accomplish. And I feel like he just defaults as a defensive coach to playing it safe. Try to I want to trust my defense. Want to just like take the safe route instead of making maybe a little more risk to try to go out and ice the game. And I would like to see that change a bit, especially recognizing that your offense is appreciably better than your defense at this point.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not ever going to be the person, because I have to deal with the mentions if I do say this, that we need to worry about Matt Eberflus in a game where, Johnathan, you and we can't talk out of two sides of our mouth, right? I can't be mad at Eberflus for being 3-7 and feeling like he's overachieving when I was one of the people at the start of the season saying the Bears aren't going 10-7. They're closer to 5-12, if that high. And so the fact that they're losing a lot of these games, not surprising. The fact that it keeps coming down to the very end, and yet they're not finding a way, whether it is a loaf from Velus Jones not being able to catch the punt, whether it's a loaf from Equinemius St. Brown not catching a ball that literally hits him in the hands on fourth down, whether it's a loaf from, honestly, you could give the entire team a massive loaf that they had the ball, like went 3 and out, punted it away, gave up the final score. This all after a missed PAT, and then couldn't figure it out on the final drive for one reason or another. This felt like a team almost determined to lose. Not great overall, but you take the good with the bad. Obviously, Fields playing well is enough to remediate a lot of frustration. And frankly, I would rather lose these games than games that the Bears are just getting pummeled and we have to think about potentially drafting another quarterback. So I don't know if I'm worried yet either, but the defense definitely needs to come to play when they get a little bit more juice from a talent perspective. It's not as if their scheme is anything sparkly. Especially compared to the Fangio scheme, which I did ultimately like more from a schematic perspective, but one of these days the wins need to come. I am the meathead, Johnathan, that worries a little bit about losing culture. I look at a team like the Chargers, who I understand have every injury under the sun. I get it. But they were the latest team that we saw to have the perfect season, where Justin Herbert looked great and the team looked terrible and they went 3-13 and they got a great pick. And since then, they have yet to make the playoffs, Johnathan. I don't want to draw conclusions that are too strong because, again, their injury luck has just been categorically awful. But whether it is throwing the ball more on these late game situations instead of turtling up and getting conservative, Eberflus has been better than I expected a conservative 50-year-old coach to be on fourth down. So I hope that sticks. 2-point conversions have been nice to see. I don't think he's holistically anti-analytics, Johnathan, and I do think that's a good thing. But past a certain point, can we win a one-score game, for crying out loud? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely frustrating to see some of those losses piling up. But I just honestly, I went into this year with such low expectations that I really just cared about seeing Fields be the guy. And he's been better than I could have dared to let myself hope for the last month plus now.
I think
And
even funnier, just building off of that, Johnathan, is that Fields has been good in a way that still makes sense because it's not like the receivers have been surprisingly good, right? It's not like the offensive line has jumped out and shocked you with how well they pass protect. You know what I mean? Fields has had to literally set records with his legs because I am not seeing guys separate. It was nice to see Fields throw a slant today, even if it was a little bit late. And I do worry that some what seems like basic concepts passing wise just aren't in the offense. I mean, when the Bears are getting cover one and cover three, they aren't running the out routes that we literally saw Fields throw with Nagy last year. There's actually quite a few routes that it feels to me, Johnathan, like Fields showed us he can throw them as a rookie, and then he's not throwing them now. So is it offensive line? Is it not? I don't really know. But I can't help but think that I'm not that worried about the staff. I don't ever expect the staff to be something that's incredibly impressive. But then again, Johnathan, if I can just call out another defensive head coach that has had a lot of success recently, not only has Sean McDermott done great things in Buffalo, regardless of what's going on, even though, yes, they had a really nasty loss today. We're just not going to talk about that. But Pete Carroll in Seattle is blowing things up in a good way. I mean, I will say that Pete, who has endured tons of nerd-based scrutiny over the last 3 years and looked flat out washed, especially come the Russ trade, has so overperformed recently that it does have me wondering whether sometimes we just need somebody to blame, where the ball bounces poorly, the calls don't go your way, everything stacks up against you, you lose by a point, right? And you got to point the finger at somebody. So for now, I'm going to do my best to take a deep breath. And I guess that ultimately constitutes my final thought. What about you? This game, the rest of the season, Johnathan Wood, what are your final thoughts on the Chicago Bears right now?
honestly, I just want to see Justin Fields continue to be that dude. If that happens, I really don't care about anything else. They'll get the rest sorted later. If they've got the quarterback to that level that he's shown in the last month, that's not a fluke but can continue, I am ecstatic regardless of whatever else happens in the next remaining 7 games or whatever they have.
I doubt you're alone in that. I mean, the Bears are quickly becoming, whether it's Rich Eisen saying it, Colin Cowherd saying it, pick your favorite national talking head. The Bears are becoming must-watch television, and I have never seen that before. Cutler days, Trubisky days. I mean, I cannot think, Johnathan, the last time that I heard the Bears described as fun, and here we are. They are a lot of fun, even if they somehow keep coming up empty. This is the same way people talked about Justin Herbert, and Justin Herbert, not 2 years later, was considered more talented than Patrick Mahomes, who's just doing amazing things in Kansas City. I mean, Johnathan, the funny part is, if I guess I do have one more final thought, it's this, right? That Bears fans ought, I understand your reticence. I've been there, and chances are I've not been alive as long as plenty of y'all have been Bears fans. I get it. It's been hard out there. I've only been a Bears fan for 15 years, and it's been hard enough watching this team flail, flounder, and find unique ways to screw things up, right, Johnathan? Whether it's this draft pick or that head coach choice or this GM move or why did we do that? The Greg Olson trade, like there are all sorts of marks throughout this franchise that have made people mad forever while they have watched other people succeed. But Johnathan, I have seen this movie so many times, I can't not mention it. When a young quarterback gets this much attention, it's the inverse of when a young quarterback gets as much negative attention as Mitch Trubisky did. It is hard for me to look at Justin Fields right now as anything other than exactly what you would want to see out of a young quarterback, especially when all the guys that we pointed to last year, whether it's Trevor Lawrence, whether it's Mac Jones, we really didn't point at Zach Wilson and Trey Lance much the same way. But so let's just focus on those two. They're struggling a ton here in their second year, while Fields is just finding a way within the structure of the game of football to succeed and score points. And Johnathan, you're a big yards per attempt guy, big EPA per play guy, like a very big numbers guy. I think you'd agree that at the end of the day, the only reason we talk about yards per attempt, yards per game, like passing success rate, all those metrics is to get points on the board. And the fact that Fields is consistently leading the Bears 2 points on the board is about as positive a thing you could possibly see, right? Like, I think the Bears fans ought to be allowed to believe in this right now because there are so many signs pointing in the right direction.
Absolutely. I mean, through their first 6 games, I think it was, they were averaging like 15, 16 points a game. They've put up 30 4 weeks in a row since their mini bye. And that's all Fields. And we've even seen that with his wide receivers letting him down and his offensive line letting him down. They're still putting up 30 points a game. Like, that is ridiculous. And that is because their quarterback has just been that good. And
It's
the
bizarre.
arrow is pointing just straight up. And I cannot wait to see where it goes from here.
Neither can I. You tell me, Johnathan, as I let you go, what can people look for throughout the rest of the week, throughout the rest of the season? Where can we find you? What you got?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm a college professor and I teach an overload every fall, so I don't do a whole lot during the season. I know you've been trying to get me on all year.
Hey, I'll take it.
So you can find me on Twitter at Johnathan_Wood. I write stuff for DeBears blog, but mostly in the off season because I have a lighter load at work in the spring. So I'm already dreaming up things that I want to research and write about next spring. And I'm looking forward to having the chance to do that.
I can't wait. I mean, the stuff you come up with, if nothing else, always challenges our way of thinking. And I mean, for crying out loud, to use an example, you were one of the people waving the caution flag about Cole Kmet's usage. And through the first couple weeks of the season, that certainly seemed to be true, regardless of him catching fire or not. The irony, Johnathan, about that, by the way, is that nothing that I think has happened in the last 3 weeks has proved any of that wrong. The whole comparison coming out was Kyle Rudolph, and the Kyle Rudolph we saw in the Giants uniform was a nice reminder that a lot of these tight ends are about as good as their quarterback makes them. You know what I mean? And so, hey, maybe there's some truth to the idea of if a tight end is as good as a quarterback makes him, then Cole Kmet becoming a touchdown machine kind of says something about Fields, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's what you want to see from a quarterback, is that they elevate the players around them and make them better. And that's exactly what you're seeing from Fields right now. I mean, if you look at, remove the quarterback from the offense, the Bears have the worst offense in the NFL. In a season where scoring is down tremendously, they're scoring 30 points a game over a solid month. That is Fields. That is all Fields, and that is just feels unbelievable to say. And my whole life has been, yeah, but the quarterback. Do they have the quarterback to be able to compete with these top teams? And now they have the quarterback. They just need the rest of the roster.
Can't help but agree. Perfect. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Bear With Me. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. As always, you can find more work on the Windy City Gridiron podcasting channel as Jeff Burkus and Lester Wiltfong will be right with you tomorrow on Bear and Balanced, plus a litany of other great shows. Johnathan, thanks so much for coming on, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
That'll do it for us. All right, perfect. Johnathan, I know you're a busy man. If you got to go, you got to go. I'm going to respond to a little bit of the chat here, so feel free to stick around or not, and that totally works. What you thinking?
Yeah, I got a few minutes I can stick around. What it's about 4:30. I can, yeah, maybe 15 minutes or so.
So, and that works for me because I got to run. I got to help with my baby. Anyways, I will tell you. Okay, so Johnathan, are you worried? Like, we're technically on the air, obviously, but like, we're not recording the podcast anymore. Is there any part of the whole I want to see Fields throw the ball thing that you think holds water? Or and I'm trying to give you just as open a question as possible. Try not to lead you to water at all. As you watch the college game, as you watch the current pro game, when you are Justin Fields and you're not ultimately like Mitch Trubisky running the ball always had a ceiling because eventually they would just spy him with a linebacker and he probably wasn't going to beat a linebacker in an open foot race. But when you've got the physical gifts that Justin Fields does his current style bother you? Or at the end of the day, do you feel like a player that makes plays makes plays?
A little bit of both. I really, really liked seeing today more than in past weeks that when he was scrambling, he was waiting that extra second to commit to run and trying to spring guys open for the passing game. And he did hit, it was a short touchdown, but a touchdown to commit that way, that he was threatening the run and pulled the defender up and just popped it right over the top. He had like a nice pass to Pringle that way too. I want to see what that looks like with better wide receivers. And that's where I was so frustrated going into the season that they were not giving him, I thought, and still think, enough talent to throw to, because I want to see what he looks like with real quality NFL receivers, to how much room there is to grow there in the passing game and how he can grow into that to really evaluate him more fairly. I think right now a lot of the running is just kind of because he has to.
Mm-hmm. I can't help but think the same thing. And Keelani, I know you took a lot of grief in the chat throughout this stream, but I really don't think that a lot of what you're coming from. Look, I'll be honest. I think you're more negative, like about Fields right now than I am. But I don't think that the greater point of what you're trying to say is somehow something we need to just throw out because we don't like it. Right? Fields does eventually need to use his arm a lot more. But I know whenever I'm watching the film, I tend to leave the game with a very similar impression. But I've done this now, Johnathan. I've had the same thought process at least 7 weeks in a row now, where I leave the game going, "Come another game under 200 yards. This is getting ridiculous. I cannot believe we're finding anything." And I watch the tape. He's not open. That's the read. Yeah, nothing's there. Okay, well, pressure right at the drop back. Like, unless Fields was literally Patrick Mahomes, there are a lot of these that I just am not expecting, like plays through the air that I'm just not expecting a second-year quarterback to make. Because right now, Johnathan, whenever he's given, even on play action dropbacks, but especially normal dropbacks, he can't hit the back of his drop without pressure coming in his face. And can you blame the guy for being overly sensitive to pressure right now? Right? I mean, we can't live in a world where Fields gets blasted on the internet for a horrific, almost 20% sack rate, and also he's somehow not sensitive to pressure, right? He's going to become sensitive to pressure if that's the mark he's getting, like after these games, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I also am having a hard time looking at those sack rates because they look at sacks versus pass attempts to get those sack rates. So like they count passes or all dropbacks as sacks or passes that you got off. But that's missing scrambles, which he scrambles a lot. Like
A lot.
a lot of his runs are not designed. I mean, some of them, especially the last few weeks, have been, but a lot of them are not. And so I don't think that rate is as high as it actually looks, just because like they're throwing it like 18 or 20 times a game, but they're probably calling 25 to 30 pass plays a game between sacks and scrambles, adding another 8 or 10 on there. And so then 3 sacks a game is more like 10%, not 15, which is high, but not unusually so. And
Makes
again,
sense.
that's where I think it's just so hard to evaluate him, because you've seen all these plays today where I wish we could watch all 22 live. I love that on Amazon on Thursday nights. It's awesome. I wish they did that for every broadcast, because I'm seeing Fields extending, buying 5 or 6 seconds, and still it's like he has nobody to throw to. And I don't know if he's not seeing them. My guess is they're not getting open. And if you're scrambling for that long and guys aren't able to find a way to get open, how are you an NFL wide receiver? Like, you
Right.
should not be able to be covered for 6 seconds and call yourself an NFL receiver.
And there's some truth. Like there's part of me that completely agrees with that. There's also part of me, Jonathan, that like what you call drive, and your Equinemius St. Brown. I don't expect you to run. That's just in case you didn't know, it's a shallow crosser paired with a dig on the backside.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're fast, you run away from the guy, and if you're not, you can't be covered. So there's pieces of this that I know I look at, and I don't know. It's what I look at, just to Kalani's point, because honestly, if it sounds like I'm focusing too much on the people that disagree, it's because the people that disagree, we have a discussion. The people that I agree with, what's there to say, right? Because you mentioned that he holds onto the ball longer than plenty of other quarterbacks. So did Jalen Hurts until his third year. It's a very common problem with guys who go from high school, where they're playing in one read offenses, to college, where in Fields' case, you got to remember, Kalani, this isn't Johnathan, this isn't Josh Allen, this isn't even Justin Herbert at Oregon. And at Ohio State, Fields had to look to his second read sometimes. I mean, he had Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, for crying out loud, as his number 1 and his number 2 wide receiver. It's actually not weird to me that it would take a while for Fields to develop a full field processor, if only because, Johnathan, I don't think it's an accident that a lot of the quarterbacks that we've seen succeed in the NFL came out of small schools like Purdue, Drew Brees, NC State, Russell Wilson. NC State, ironically, that's also Mike Glennon, though that's neither here nor there. Then we've got, like, I don't know where Nick Foles came from, to use him as a silly example.
Arizona
Michigan,
State.
like Arizona. Honestly, let's use it, because the point is that I'm going to name a bunch of these programs: Wyoming for Josh Allen, Texas Tech for Patrick Mahomes, that aren't known for having elite top level blue chippers, but they are programs that had to play those teams normally, right? So you have quarterbacks that had to figure it out, right? That they were accustomed to the NFL style of my guy won't win all the time. Whereas then you get Justin Fields, outrageous physical athlete, incredible physical talent, and his receivers are every bit as talented and outrageous against Michigan State, against Rutgers, against Indiana, against even not Northwestern, because they had 21 guys that missed that game. Like, I can only imagine what you thought as a Northwestern grad watching that one, where it's like, we're playing Ohio State's B team and Justin Fields. Like, what a weird game that was. But all the same, it's wild watching what I am at the very least seeing as a quarterback that is learning on the job. I mean, he's 23 years old, right? And not to mention, another unspoken piece that I personally keep seeing, Johnathan, is that everybody points to the Bears running game. This running game would get smushed if Trevor Siemian was at quarterback. I mean, people really are defending the run now with 9 guys. Like, yes, it's great that Khalil Herbert is grinding out carries. I love me some Khalil Herbert for sure, but I don't think it works near as well if you get the usual 10 on 11 defense that tends to happen. Whereas with Justin Fields in the game, I mean, you lose, what is it? Like, you stop paying attention for a couple minutes and he takes to the house. Like, I mean, there's a point, don't you think, Johnathan, where like the late game run against Washington, the big touchdown run against Minnesota, I can't remember how long it was. I think it was 35 yards that didn't count due to the holding call.
42.
The huge touchdown run last week, the huge touchdown run today. Like, you take your eyes off Fields for a moment and he will punish you. It's wild to watch.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw that last year. I had a lot of fun this offseason looking at statistical stuff from last year with the Bears, because we had a significant sample size with Fields at QB and other QBs with Dalton and Foles. And you could really see the difference in running back efficiency with Fields at QB versus the other guys. So to your point now, like, this running game would get shut down with Siemian, because teams have to respect Fields. And so that changes the numbers for how they can defend the other guys. And like the Bears, their running back. So not even Fields' impact on the run game directly where he was carrying the ball, but in handing it off to other guys, they averaged like, I'd have to go back and look, but it was about a half yard per carry more. They had about double the explosive play rate of when it was Dalton or Foles at QB. And so I think
Absolutely.
he has a huge impact on that as well, beyond just carrying the ball.
100%. And I'll ask you one more question because I know your time's running out. Where I think that there are a lot of people out there that justifiably want the quarterback to just visually look a certain way. Johnathan, this isn't stats. This isn't film that I'm about to ask you about. Honestly, do you think that there's a percentage of some of this where people they've watched Drew Brees, they've watched Tom Brady, they've watched Aaron Rodgers, who's about as mobile as the really good people have been, sans Russell Wilson, and they just expect quarterback to look a certain way. Like, do you think there's any truth to that piece? Because I get it. Like, Nick Foles is every bit the field general that I think people wanted. Like, stone-footed, all the audibles in the world at the line, because it had to be, right? If he didn't get into the right play, he took sack. There was no other option. Like, with Fields, I can't help but think that he plays a style of quarterback and will likely play a style of quarterback going forward that is just a bit foreign, because in the NFL, it has been an assumption that the quarterback isn't the best athlete on the field, until now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of those guys right now, though, like Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Hurts, Fields, probably more that I'm forgetting, but who are just really good athletes who also are good quarterbacks to varying levels. And I think that's becoming more of like the modern prototype of a quarterback in some ways, where I'm not sure if we're ever going to see another like true pocket passer superstar like a Brady or Manning without mobility again. I mean, never say never. The NFL goes in cycles. So maybe like 20 years from now, that'll be the next big thing. But
Well, I
yeah,
mean, the silly part is, not to cut you off, you watched the Houston game, right? Like, you watched Davis Mills. Davis Mills is what people would have fawned over in 2014. I mean, stands tall in the pocket, delivers the ball on time, regardless of whether or not his guy is open, right? Makes little moves in the pocket to try to keep himself out of pressure, runs when he absolutely needs to, is more athletic than he should be, right? And in today's NFL, it's just not enough. You need the guy like Kyler Murray did against the Raiders that's just going to go score regardless of whether the defense like tries or not. You know what I mean? The guy who says it doesn't matter what you do, I am getting in the end zone. And we're seeing more of that. I mean, it's a bizarre transition, I think, at the very least, to make, where we are starting to watch a quarterback, or at least a style of quarterback game, that's just completely different from the day and age that we used to. And it gets extra weird because, Johnathan, do you know the biggest change from when? Can you name the biggest change that happened from a rules perspective, where when Tom Brady was a rookie compared to right now when Justin Fields is a rookie? Do you know what I'm talking about? I'm trying not to completely give it away, but there's a huge change that massively like shifted the way the NFL works. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I can think of two. One is that they don't let the defensive backs mug the receivers as much anymore, which makes it a
Yes.
lot easier for guys to get open. And then two, you're not allowed, like you can't hit the quarterbacks high, you can't hit the quarterbacks low, you can't hit them even a half step late, like just the rules protecting the quarterbacks as well.
Oh man, you're talking about on-field rules. Do you remember that back when Peyton Manning was a rookie, Johnathan, you could practice as much as you wanted. There was no
Oh, yeah.
limitation on how much you could practice. So, especially for young quarterbacks, my understanding is that it was completely allowed to take your quarterback's coach, to take your receivers, to take your young quarterback and drill for 12 hours a day. And a lot of these guys did, right? Like, for as much as it's neato that technology has allowed young quarterbacks to put on like the virtual reality headset, it's not even a joke. They really do. And get like virtual reps, because those are unregulated. Reps weren't regulated when Tom Brady was young. Reps weren't regulated when Drew Brees was young. And why are we shocked that even in a day and age, because back then, Johnathan, it was generally unknown that your rookie quarterback was going to be terrible. Like, people just didn't even blink when Peyton Manning led the league in interceptions. When Rodgers, it took 3 years to actually get him on the field, nobody was worried. They were like, yeah, he's had his time on the bench. It's time for him to play now. Whereas now, players have to learn on the fly with half or less of the reps than they used to. It's not surprising to me that there is a decent correlation, wouldn't you say, between mobility and players that succeed in the NFL. Not that if you are mobile, you will succeed, but those who do succeed are mobile. And that even includes Joe Burrow, who I think we'd all agree emulates more of the mobility than you would ever expect, not because he's running for a bazillion yards a game, but because he shakes his way out of like a bunch of sacks. It's just interesting watching that where the rookie quarterback seems to have to bring something to the table or else he won't succeed. And it's nice to see that whether it's the running game that he offers, the running game that he or the running game and the way he affects defenses, Fields is clearly a factor in the defensive game plan. And I can't help but think that as a young quarterback, that's all you're trying to be before, like Patrick Mahomes said, entering his third year. I think after his third year, as a matter of fact, he won MVP. And then they asked him about it. And he was like, I couldn't read defenses until like probably week 14 last year. And the whole NFL went, wait, what? And watching the way he plays now without Tyreek Hill, I believe him, Johnathan. I mean, he looks like such a better quarterback despite all those talented highlights. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and that's what I always thought that like with Mike Vick was like played that style 20 years ago in the NFL, but never really developed that great as a like passer and ability to like make multiple reads and stuff as much because he never got past the point where if it's not there, I can just take off and run and make something happen, and like that works for a while, but injuries add up when you try to play that style. To ultimately be, these quarterbacks, you think of like the Bradys and Mannings and Brees, who were really good for like 20 years. If you want to last, that's got to be as a passer more. And we've seen guys make that leap. Like Lamar has gotten a lot better as a pocket passer since his rookie year. And you would hope to see that growth from Fields too. That will allow you, yes, my legs still are a weapon, but they are becoming more and more secondary to my ability to beat people with my arm and my brain, which is more of the traditional quarterback play.
I can't help but agree. I also will say, Johnathan, that I think we're looking at a generation of quarterbacks that just aren't going to play past like 38. I mean, I don't know, right? But the running style just means it's dramatically more likely that unless you make the wholesale transition to being pretty much just a thrower like Patrick Mahomes is, it may be a Cam-like career. And if anything, I would tell you at any point, Johnathan, give me the guy that has a shot at winning you an MVP award. Right now, Justin Fields is playing a style of ball that will get him. It might get him MVP votes this year. Probably won't because the Bears aren't good enough, But if the Bears, let's say, Johnathan, that they had won today's game, right? Let's say that then Josh Allen, who's hurt, right, doesn't play against the Bears and they sneak into the playoffs, right? And Tua, something happens because right now I think Tua is the runaway favorite. Not that we have to get into MVP talk. Justin Fields would be considered the guy that willed the Bears into the playoffs and might get a couple of stray MVP votes, right? But I say all of that because that style may not last you forever, but when you can get that kind of play, give me the decade, Give me the 10 years of that play, and I will worry about the backstretch of his career when we get there. You know what I mean? Like, I would love it if Fields transitioned into a way that he could be a literal Hall of Famer, a 15-year super pro. You know what I mean? Like, I would love all of that. But Johnathan, I think you'd agree. There's a point where we got to take the cart. We got to put it behind the horse here. Like, let's get the good quarterback play. Let's field the team around him in his third year before we start thinking, oh, yeah, but is this going to really succeed when he's 34 years old? Like, evolution is going to have to happen. He can't run like this forever. I mean, he just can't, but he's also doing a decent job of avoiding the huge like hits. He took more in this game than he did last week, but last week was like a miracle game. You know what I mean? So we'll just have to see. But either way, I think we both got stuff to do. Anything you want to tell the people of Second City Gridiron before we sign off?
No, not really. I'm just excited to hopefully see this train keep on rolling next week.
Same here. Guys, thanks so much. We'll see you on Tuesday. Absolutely cannot wait to get into this film as soon as I can. We're going to start posting some on the internet, obviously, but I got to get that all 22 out before I really want to take a look at it. Gosh, J-Dub, the broadcast skews so much. Like, I just can't even do it, right?
Yeah.
But Tuesday night, 8 p.m. We'll see you soon. Get the podcast on the network soon. And you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much. Bear down.